My life had become a study in beige. Beige walls in my apartment, beige cubicle at the accounting firm, a beige sedan that got me from one to the other with unremarkable efficiency. I was a man of ledgers and balances, of quiet observation from a safe distance. I'd spent a decade convincing myself this was contentment, that the faint, persistent ache in my chest was just indigestion from a hastily eaten lunch. It was a well-constructed, if fragile, lie. The lie began to crumble the day Mr. Henderson called me into his mahogany-paneled office. He wanted me to conduct an on-site audit for a client. A long one. 6 weeks. It wasn't the work that was unusual, it was the location. A sprawling cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere, owned by a family he'd known for 50 years. They're old-fashioned, Leo, he'd said, peering at me over his glasses. They trust a face more than a file transfer. You'll have a room in the main house. Fresh air will do you good. I didn't want fresh air. I wanted my routine, my predictable quiet, the comfortable loneliness I had curated so carefully. But I said yes, because I was a good employee, and because a small, treacherous part of me was screaming for a change of scenery, no matter how inconvenient. So I traded my beige world for one of endless blue sky and dusty brown earth. The ranch was vast, a kingdom of fence posts and grazing cattle under a sun that seemed twice as large and 3 times as hot as the one in the city. I was met at the door of the sprawling, single-story ranch house not by the elderly owners, but by him. He was the foreman, Cole. He didn't offer a handshake, just a nod. His eyes, the color of moss after a rain, took me in with an unnerving stillness. He was tall, built of long, lean muscle that showed in the way his worn denim shirt stretched across his shoulders. His hands, resting on his narrow hips, were calloused and stained with work. There was a fine layer of dust on his boots and a faint scent of hay, leather, and something else, something uniquely him, that clung to the air around him. "Leo," I said, my voice sounding thin. "Cole," he replied. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "The Hendersons are in town. I'll show you your room. And your office." He said the word office like it was a foreign concept, something amusingly out of place here. He led me through the house. I followed the straight line of his back, my gaze catching on the way his dark hair curled just over the collar of his shirt. He moved with an economy of motion, a quiet confidence that made my own city-bred awkwardness feel loud and clumsy. He showed me to a guest room that was larger than my entire apartment, and then to a small study off the main living area. "This is you," he said, gesturing to the antique desk. Its window looked out over the main yard, the corrals, and the distant, imposing shape of the largest barn. Then he was gone, leaving me in a silence that felt heavier than the one I'd left behind. My new beige box had a much better view, and from that window, my audit of the ranch's finances quickly became secondary to my audit of its foreman. For the first week, my interactions with Cole were minimal, bordering on non-existent. A curt nod in the morning as he strode past my window with a mug of coffee steaming in the cool dawn air. A brief, unreadable glance if our paths crossed in the main house. He was a creature of the outdoors, of physical labor and quiet command. I was a man of indoor light and silent numbers. We were 2 different species. Yet I watched him. I told myself it was sociological curiosity. I was a visitor in a foreign land, and he was its most intriguing inhabitant. From my desk, I saw him break a young horse, his movements a patient and silent conversation with the animal. I saw him mend a fence under the brutal midday sun, the muscles in his back and arms working with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. I saw him leaning against a post at dusk, rolling a cigarette with a focused grace, the tiny flame of the match briefly illuminating the hard planes of his face. Every small detail became a data point I logged and analyzed. The way he squinted against the sun, creating tiny crinkles at the corners of his eyes. The specific cadence of his walk. The rare moments he'd allow a small, wry smile to touch his lips when talking to the other hands. A smile that never quite reached his eyes, but softened the severity of his expression for a fleeting second. I was building a profile of a man who likely didn't know my last name, and the intensity of my focus started to unnerve me. This wasn't curiosity. It was an obsession. I was a lonely man with a new, unattainable object for his quiet pining. It was a familiar, painful pattern. My first real conversation with him was about a spreadsheet. One of the ranch's suppliers had a billing discrepancy, and I needed the original invoice from a delivery 2 months prior. The ranch's filing system was a chaotic mix of shoeboxes and dusty binders stored in a back room of the main barn. I had spent an hour getting nowhere, sneezing from the dust, and growing increasingly frustrated. The barn door creaked open, casting a long rectangle of blinding sunlight into the dim, sweet-smelling space. Cole stood silhouetted against the light. "Lost?" he asked. That low voice sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the relative cool of the barn. "Looking for an invoice," I managed, trying to sound professional and not like a mole who had burrowed too far from his hole. "From P&K Feed Supply. April." He didn't say anything. He just walked past me, his arm brushing mine as he passed. The contact was nothing, a flicker of cotton against cotton, but my skin burned. I stopped breathing. He went directly to a battered metal cabinet in the corner I had overlooked, opened a drawer with a loud screech, and pulled out a binder. He flipped through a few pages and then pulled out a single sheet of paper. He held it out to me. As I took it, my fingers brushed against his. His skin was rough, warm, and calloused. It was like touching stone that had been sitting in the sun. It was a touch that lasted no more than a second, but my internal monologue went into a full-blown meltdown. His hand didn't recoil. It lingered, just for a fraction of a moment, a beat of stillness between us in the dusty air. I looked up from our hands to his face. His expression was unreadable, his mossy eyes fixed on mine. "Thanks," I whispered, my throat suddenly dry. He just nodded, his gaze holding mine for a beat too long before he turned and walked out of the barn, leaving me with the invoice in my trembling hand and the ghost of his touch on my skin. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs. I replayed the moment again and again, analyzing it from every angle. It was an accident, a coincidence, a meaningless transfer of a piece of paper. But my body, starved for any kind of connection, screamed that it was more. That night, a storm rolled in. Not a city storm of rain and distant thunder, but a wild, elemental thing that shook the old ranch house to its foundations. The wind howled like a hungry animal, and the rain came down in sheets, turning the world outside my window into a churning, liquid darkness. Then, with a flicker and a groan, the power went out. I was plunged into a profound blackness, the kind that swallows sound. My laptop battery was dead, and my phone was at 5%. I fumbled for the desk drawer, my hands searching for the small emergency flashlight I'd packed. My fingers closed around it just as a knock sounded on my door. "Leo," Cole's voice cut through the dark. I managed to open the door, the flashlight beam wobbling in my hand. He was holding an old-fashioned kerosene lamp, the flame casting flickering, dramatic shadows across his face. "Generator didn't kick on," he said, his tone clipped and professional. "Fuse might have blown. I could use a hand." "A hand?" I repeated, bewildered. "I'm an accountant. I don't know anything about generators." "You know how to hold a light," he said flatly. There was no room for argument in his voice. So I followed him out into the storm. He gave me a heavy-duty rain slicker that smelled of him. That same earthy, leathery scent, now mixed with the smell of rain. We made our way to a small shed behind the house, the wind trying to tear the slicker from my body and the rain soaking my pants from the ankles up. Inside the shed, the noise of the storm was slightly muted, replaced by the smell of gasoline and oil. The generator was a hulking, greasy beast. "Hold the light steady," Cole commanded, already on his knees beside it, pulling open a panel. I did as I was told, focusing the beam where he pointed. We were in a tiny, enclosed space. His shoulder was inches from my knee. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing over the roar of the wind outside. I was acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from his body. My hand started to shake. "Steady," he grunted, not looking up from the mess of wires he was examining. "Sorry," I mumbled, gripping the flashlight with both hands. He worked in silence for several minutes, his large, capable hands moving with practiced confidence. He'd murmur instructions to me. A little to the left, right there, and I'd obey instantly. We were a team, a strange partnership of city and country, of numbers and mechanics, forged in the dark. For the first time since I'd arrived, the barrier between us felt permeable. The roles we played, accountant and foreman, were stripped away by the storm and the darkness, leaving just two men trying to fix a machine. "There," he said finally, flicking a switch. With a cough and a roar, the generator sputtered to life. The single bare bulb overhead flickered on, flooding the small shed with harsh, yellow light. The lights in the main house would be on now. Cole rose to his feet, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. He looked at me, and in the unflattering light of the bare bulb, I saw he had a smudge of grease on his cheek. For the first time, he looked less like an intimidating stoic and more like a man who was tired. "Thanks," he said, and this time the words sounded different, less perfunctory. Back in the warm, dry kitchen, the silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence. Comfortable. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if I wanted one, and pushed a glass across the big wooden table toward me. I took it. We sat across from each other, the only sounds the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the distant hum of the generator. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes on me over the rim of the glass. The intensity of his gaze made my skin prickle. "You always this wound up, city boy?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. The nickname wasn't an insult. It was teasing, almost gentle. I shrugged, looking down into my glass. The amber liquid swirled. "It's how I'm built, I guess. Order. Predictability." He made a low sound in his throat, something between a chuckle and a sigh. "Nothing predictable out here. A horse goes lame, a fence breaks, a storm comes out of nowhere. You can't put life on a spreadsheet, Leo." He used my name, my actual name. And in that quiet kitchen, with the storm raging outside, it felt more intimate than any touch. He spoke of the ranch, of the rhythm of the seasons, of a favorite horse he'd had as a kid that was smarter than most people he knew. He wasn't sharing secrets, not really, but he was sharing pieces of himself. The stoic facade had cracked, just a little, and he was letting me see inside. I just listened, nursing my whiskey, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the alcohol. I was seeing the man, not just the foreman, and the ache in my chest sharpened into something that felt dangerously like hope. The fragile peace of that night was shattered 3 weeks into my stay. I was walking back from the main barn, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, feeling the pleasant warmth of the late afternoon sun. 2 of the younger ranch hands, men I only knew as Donnie and Mark, were leaning against a corral fence, smoking. As I passed, I heard Donnie's loud, braying laugh. Swear to God, he looked at the thing like it was going to bite him. "Prissy little pencil pusher." Mark snickered. "You see the way he walks?" Altight asked. "My cousin's a queer in Austin, walks just like that." I froze. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the first time I'd heard words like that, but it had been a long time. My carefully constructed professional armor felt paper thin. I wanted to disappear. I just kept my head down and quickened my pace, pretending I hadn't heard. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "That's enough." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. It was Cole. He had come around the corner of the stables, silent as a shadow. He wasn't looking at me. His entire focus was on the 2 men, and his face was granite. His moss-green eyes had gone dark, turning to chips of ice. Donnie and Mark straightened up immediately, their smirks vanishing. They looked like schoolboys caught misbehaving. "Just talking, Cole," Donnie mumbled, stubbing out his cigarette on the fence post. "Go check the fence line on the north pasture. Both of you," Cole said, his voice dangerously low. Now, they didn't argue. They practically scrambled over each other to get away, casting nervous glances back at him. Cole watched them go, his posture rigid. Only when they were out of sight did he turn his head and look at me. I was still standing there, rooted to the spot, my face burning with a mixture of shame and something else I couldn't name. Gratitude? He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable as ever, but there was a question in his eyes. "Are you okay?" It was as clear as if he'd spoken the words aloud. I couldn't speak. I just gave a tight, jerky nod and practically fled toward the safety of the house, the weight of his gaze following me every step of the way. His quiet, immediate defense of me was a brand on my skin. It was more personal, more potent, than any physical touch. It made the tension that had been simmering between us impossible to ignore. Later that evening, the air thick and heavy with unspoken things, he found me. I was in the study, staring blankly at a column of figures that refused to add up. I heard the soft tread of his boots on the hardwood floor and looked up to see him standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his work clothes. He had on a clean, dark t-shirt that stretched across his chest and clean jeans. He'd showered. His hair was still damp, and the clean scent of soap mingled with his own inherent smell. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. I swallowed, my throat tight. Fine. The word was a lie, and we both knew it. He walked into the room, not stopping until he was leaning against the edge of my desk, crossing his arms over his chest. The space suddenly felt very small. "Some people," he said, his eyes fixed on my face, "don't know when to keep their mouths shut." My gaze dropped to the papers on my desk. "It's not a big deal." "Seemed like a big deal," he countered softly. There was a long pause. The silence stretched, filled with the buzzing of a fly against the window pane and the frantic beating of my own heart. The subtext was a living thing in the room with us. This wasn't about Donnie and Mark anymore. It was about me. It was about him. It was about the charged space between us that had been crackling with electricity for weeks. I am looking at the numbers on the page, but I am not seeing them. I see only the pattern of the wood grain on the desk, the scuff on the toe of his boot, the way the muscles in his forearm flex as he shifts his weight. I feel his presence like a physical pressure, a magnetic pull I have been fighting since the day I arrived. He pushes off the desk. I think he's going to leave. A wave of disappointment, so sharp it's painful, washes over me. But he doesn't leave. He takes a step toward me, then another. He stops right behind my chair. I can feel the heat of his body at my back. I close my eyes. My breathing has hitched. This is it. This is the precipice. "Leo," he says. Just my name. And it's a question, a statement, and a plea all at once. My audit was scheduled to end in 2 days. 2 days until I had to pack up my beige life and return to my beige apartment, leaving this world of vibrant color and overwhelming sensation behind. The thought was a physical ache, a hollowness in my gut. The past few weeks had rewired my entire being. The thought of going back to a life without the possibility of seeing Cole stride across the yard, without the memory of his low voice in a quiet kitchen, was unbearable. It was my last full day. I had finalized my reports, packed them neatly into my briefcase. I spent the afternoon avoiding everyone, taking a long walk along the dusty track that led to the highway, as if to reacquaint myself with the idea of leaving. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the vast sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of it felt like a mockery. I was heading toward the main house, my steps slow and heavy, when I saw him. He was standing by the main barn, the huge double doors slightly ajar behind him. He was watching me approach, his face cast in the long shadows of twilight. He didn't move, just waited, a silent, immovable figure against the darkening landscape. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to go into the house, to avoid this final, painful confrontation. But my feet kept moving forward, drawn by that same inexorable force that had held me captive for weeks. I stopped a few feet in front of him. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of dust and dry grass and the sweet smell of hay from the barn. "My flight is tomorrow morning," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know why I said it. To fill the silence. To state the inevitable. He didn't respond to my words. He just looked at me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. Then he took a step forward, closing the small gap between us. He reached out, not quickly, but with a slow, deliberate motion, and his hand closed around my upper arm. His grip was firm, grounding. He didn't say a word. He just pulled. He pulled me toward the barn, my feet stumbling to keep up. He backed me into the sliver of darkness between the heavy wooden door and the frame, pressing me against the rough, splintery wood. My briefcase fell from my other hand, landing with a soft thud in the dust. My back was flat against the door, and he was in front of me, his body caging me in. His free hand came up to rest on the doorframe next to my head. We were inches apart, shrouded in the deepening twilight. I could feel the heat of him, see the dark intensity in his eyes. My mind was a blank slate, all the numbers and rules and anxieties wiped clean. There was only the scent of him, the solid wall of his chest so close to mine, the sound of my own ragged breathing. He lowered his head, his gaze dropping to my mouth. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. The question had been hanging in the air between us for weeks, and my answer was in the way I was trembling, the way my eyes fluttered shut. This is not an accident. This is not a misunderstanding. His lips touch mine, and the world stops. They are firm, chapped from the sun and wind, and for a moment, they are just pressed there, a silent statement. Then, he deepens the kiss. It is not a kiss of frantic passion, but of agonizing, slow-burning certainty. It is a kiss that tastes of whiskey and dust and longing. It is the most honest thing I have ever felt. His hand moves from my arm to the back of my neck, his calloused fingers tangling in my hair, holding me to him. My hands, which had been pressed uselessly against his chest, finally come to life, gripping the fabric of his shirt as if it's the only thing keeping me from dissolving completely. This is not a spreadsheet. This is not a balance sheet. This is chaos and feeling and a terrifying, beautiful reality. This is him. This is us. In the doorway of a barn, with the world fading to black around us. When he finally pulls back, it is only by an inch. He rests his forehead against mine. I can feel his breath, warm and unsteady, against my lips. I keep my eyes closed, trying to commit every sensation to memory. The roughness of the wood against my back, the solid weight of him against me, the lingering taste of him on my tongue. Leo, he breathes, and my name is a ragged, broken thing. I open my eyes. In the near darkness, I can just make out the shape of his face, his eyes searching mine. All the walls are down. The stoicism is gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded vulnerability that mirrors my own. The next morning, I woke to the gray light of dawn and an empty space beside me in the bed. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me immediately. I had gone with him after the kiss. Not to the main house, but to the small, separate cabin he lived in at the edge of the property. We hadn't talked. Words felt inadequate, clumsy. We had simply moved together, a silent agreement passing between us, and in the Spartan quiet of his room, we had found a different kind of language. But now he was gone. The sheets beside me were cool. I sat up, my heart sinking. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness, a last night indulgence before I disappeared from his life for good. All my old anxieties, the familiar chorus of self-doubt, came rushing back in. I was the beige accountant, the city boy. I didn't belong here. Last night was a fantasy, and this morning was the harsh, cold reality. I dressed quickly, my movements stiff and robotic. I didn't know what the protocol was. Do I leave a note? Do I just slip away, back to the main house, back to my packed bags and my flight and my life? The thought was a fresh wave of pain. I walked into the main room of the small cabin. It was neat, sparse. A few books on a shelf, a worn leather armchair, a clean kitchen counter. Through the window, I could see him. He was standing by the corral, his back to me, talking to one of the other hands. He looked exactly the same as he always did. Stoic, unreadable, immovable. The distance between the cabin and that corral felt like a million miles. I was standing there, paralyzed by indecision, when the cabin door opened. It was him. He must have seen me through the window. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the rest of the world. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his gaze taking in my fully dressed state, my shoes on, my posture rigid with fear. He walked over to the counter and poured 2 mugs of coffee from a pot that was already brewed. He turned and held one out to me. My hand was shaking as I took it. Our fingers didn't touch. He leaned against the counter, taking a sip from his own mug. The silence was excruciating. I waited for him to say it. That was a mistake. You should go. Have a safe flight. Wasn't a mistake, he said, his voice quiet but firm, as if he had plucked the thought directly from my head. I looked up at him, startled. His eyes were clear, steady. There was no regret in them, only a quiet intensity. I have to go, I said, my voice hoarse. My flight. I know, he said. He took another sip of coffee, his gaze never leaving my face. The work's done, he paused, and the weight of that pause was immense. But you're not. I didn't understand. What? He set his mug down on the counter with a soft click. He walked over to me, stopping just in front of me. He didn't touch me, but I could feel the energy humming between us. Don't go, he said. It wasn't a command. It was a request. Simple, direct, terrifying. I have a job, I whispered. A life. An apartment. The words sounded hollow, flimsy. Beige. "You have a room in a house you don't own and a job counting other people's money," he said, not cruelly, but with a stark honesty that stripped away all my excuses. "What kind of life is that?" He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. He pressed it into my palm. It was a key. It was old, made of heavy, cool brass. It wasn't a key to the main house. I knew, instinctively, it was the key to this cabin. His cabin. "Stay," he said again, his voice softer now. "We'll figure it out. Figure it out." 2 words. Not a promise of forever, not a grand declaration of love, but something far more real. An invitation. A beginning. A conscious choice to step off the predetermined path and into the unknown, together. I looked down at the key in my hand, its brass teeth biting into my palm. Then I looked up at him, at this quiet, steady man who had dismantled my entire world without even trying. The fear was still there, a faint tremor in the background, but for the first time, it was overshadowed by something else. Something bright and fierce and full of hope. I didn't go to the airport. I called my boss and told him I was taking a personal leave. I didn't know how to explain it, so I didn't try. Some things can't be entered into a ledger. The final scene of my old life wasn't a dramatic exit. It was quiet. It was sitting on the porch of Cole's cabin that evening, a place that was now, impossibly, ours. The sun was setting again, bleeding color across the horizon. Cole sat beside me in a matching wooden chair, his shoulder occasionally brushing against mine. He hadn't asked for the key back. He hadn't said much at all. He didn't need to. I leaned my head back against the chair, breathing in the cool evening air. It smelled of pine and dust and the faint, comforting scent of coffee from the mugs on the railing. I had come to this ranch for work, to impose order on someone else's chaos. Instead, this place, and this man, had imposed a beautiful, terrifying chaos on my order. I was no longer an observer, watching life from behind a window. I was here, on this porch, a solid, warm presence beside me. I felt the weight of the brass key in my pocket. It felt less like a key and more like an anchor. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel like I was just passing through. I felt like I'd come home.